And we're back at you with another episode of Are You a Robot podcast and videocast. This is a series where we are trying to tackle the biggest challenges, the biggest questions around AI ethics and related technologies. The way that we're doing this is by getting some of the best and brightest minds onto this podcast and asking them some pointed questions sometimes, and occasionally I'll give them a few softballs. Can't make it too difficult. Want them to actually enjoy the show. But the the goal of this, I should say, is to have a place where we stimulate discussion on these AI ethics and governance topics so we can move the conversation forward, we can drive the conversation and recognize these pieces that are not being talked about but are advancing in our daily lives as AI becomes more and more prevalent. So to stimulate this conversation, to try and find these best practices, we have created a Slack channel, and I'll leave a link to that down below in the description if you would like to check it out. I encourage you to come join us, talk to us about some of these ethical issues, this AI governance, and if you have any expertise, please reach out. Let us know what you're doing, what you're working on in the Slack. Last thing I want to mention before I jump into the bio of Paul MacDonnell is that EthicsGrade is our sponsor. They are enabling this whole thing to happen. So I've got to give them a big thank you. It wouldn't be possible to have these incredibly high caliber guests on here and be doing this if it wasn't for their utmost support and incredible help. If you want to know more about what EthicsGrade is doing as an ESG benchmarking firm that is specialized in technology governance, I encourage you to click the link below and find out more about them. All right, let's talk a little bit about our guest on the show today, Paul MacDonnell. He is one of the first people that I have ever met that works at a think tank, which for me is incredible. I have always wanted to meet someone who works at a think tank, and it looks like I finally got to meet him, albeit over a Zoom call. So if you're wondering which think tank he works at, he's the executive director at Global Digital Foundation, which is a European think tank. You'll see in the talk, we chatted a lot about GDPR and how that affects things when it comes to AI regulation. Previously, he worked as the head of European policy at ITIF, which is perhaps the most well-known and highly renowned US-based think tank in the technology industry. Recently, he published a paper that has to do with making rules around AI, and you'll see that we dive into that quite deep in the conversation today. So without further ado, let's talk with Paul.
Are you a robot?
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of our Are You a Robot podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down and talking with Paul MacDonnell. He's the executive director at Global Digital Foundation, a European think tank that is seeking to view the challenges that arise with this widespread adoption of technology. Prior to this, he was head of European policy at ITIF, which was the most highly regarded US-based think tank on technology, on the technological industry. And he also has quite an extensive history of writing for publications such as Economic Affairs and the Wall Street Journal. We were just talking about this before we hit record, how you've had some run-ins with some very special types of people, Paul. But I'd love for you to just give me a quick version of what exactly you're doing right now at this think tank.
Okay, well, we're working on, at the moment, we are concentrating very much on artificial intelligence. And we're working on two areas at the moment. There's artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence policy. And I guess I have a sort of vision about the future of artificial intelligence regulation, which I think uh, I'm trying to steer a course between, being too alarmist about it and being too complacent about it. And I think there are particular problems where we are too alarmist about it, and there are dangers to that, and there are dangers also of being completely complacent about it. The other thing we're working on is we're working on a paper on speech and the regulation of speech online, and the particular problems. And I'll be happy to talk about that if you have time. But essentially, the particular problems that arise there are the fact that we have private platforms like Facebook and Google, who in effect have become de facto regulators of speech, but there's not that much methodology being applied to how they do it and when they do it. It's a bit capricious. And so there are kind of First Amendment issues with regards to speech, I think, particularly. And so there are issues around that. And essentially my paper explores the sort of origins of the idea of hate speech, and where that comes from, and how we grapple with it culturally, and what the best recommendation for dealing with what I call hateful speech is.
Interesting.
Online.
Yeah, one thing I thought was absolutely fascinating was you wrote this paper, not the one that you're speaking of now, but the one just before this about
AI, of course,
and how you mentioned the alarmist nature of what we think about with AI, and this kind of like, I guess it's been around in pop culture for long enough. We think that, wow, the robots are coming to get us.
Sure.
Once they are smarter than us, they're going to come and just take over the planet.
Terminator,
Yeah, Terminator or whatever it may be. There's so many different references to this.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was really interesting how you brought in this historical context of, like, what was it? You said the Queen was afraid of the sewing machines back in the day.
There was a loom, manufacturers of looms, and she tried to ban it. She wanted to ban, well, she did ban it effectively. This is the Queen Elizabeth I, and it was an automation process for weaving.
Yeah,
and she wanted to ban that because she thought it would cost jobs and things like that. And there have been lots of other instances.
Well, the one that I thought was great, and I still remember this almost, was when cameras were becoming more widespread, especially the digital cameras, and it became something I remember at university or college. I would go out and people were taking pictures and then putting them onto Facebook, and I remember people still would say this idea, and it's I guess left over from what you speak about in your paper, which is when someone takes a picture of you, they like steal a piece of your soul.
Yeah, that was a sort of I made that comment. I remember in a paper. I don't know if I mentioned it. Maybe I did mention it in the I paper.
You talked about Kodak and how people were afraid of that.
That's right. So Kodak in the 1880s, 1890s. So this is like 30 years ago, 130 years ago, introduced their sort of instant camera, and it immediately caused a moral panic because people were going around photographing people without their permission.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a sense in which when you have a new technology like this, especially a kind of a consumer technology to be used in a kind of domestic setting, the difficulty is that it takes a while for etiquette to catch up with this. So, I don't even know if you remember, like when mobile phones first became very popular, there was all this tension about where and how and when they were used. On trains, did you have loud conversations? Did you, when you were if you were having a meal with somebody in a restaurant, people would pull out their phone and answer any call because like they were on business. And eventually people realized this was, as the English say, a bit naff, and it just became a kind of an etiquette no-no. So there's now much more, there isn't that much excitability now about mobile phone use, cell phone use now in society. It's kind of quietened down a bit, and there is now a kind of a rule of etiquette about it. So, and most people know the rules. So,
not all,
not all, not all, but that's
yeah. For me, it's fascinating to think about that and how this idea of when technology first comes into our lives, we fight it. And you're showing us basically in this paper, you're breaking down how AI is coming into our life right now, and we're fighting it because we don't the majority of us don't have a good grasp on what exactly it does. So I thought you did a great job of breaking down like where we are right now and what everyone thinks that where we are, right? Like for most people who know about machine learning, the idea of singularity is a bit far-fetched because we're just trying to get some kind of algorithm to recommend the right product, and we can't even
Sure,
do that.
sure.
But there are a lot of people out there that are feeling like, yeah, the singularity. You see very highly respected names and these futurists talking about how within 5 years or 10 years we're going to have singularity and they're going to be smarter than us. Or like I remember that movie Her,
Mm.
and you get the AI in your ear, and then boom, you have a companion for life,
Yes.
until they get enlightened and
It's,
they say, all right, see you later, I'm done.
yeah. It's the old
But
story, like Pygmalion. It's the old legend, you know. And this goes back to classical antiquity, you know, this idea of creating a life and then, you know, the life having its own point of view, its own agency. But the singularity, you know, I use the singularity in a way as singularity in a way is kind of a legend in some ways, and I specifically outline that certainly in its current configuration or its current conception, in particular machine learning and deep learning, um, I don't see that AI is approaching anything like ever getting to agency, and this is because of key differences between the specific nature of human intelligence and machine intelligence. Machine intelligence is almost entirely instrumental, so it's like solve this problem for me, you know. So it's machine intelligence, you know, at any human task. Like if it's a task, it will be very good, like driving, potentially, you know, driving, and you need to reconfigure all of the road, but driving, obviously recommending books and music, it's excellent at that. But where it differs from human intelligence is human intelligence has two kinds of activities, or at least I broke them down into two kinds of activities. And I was really following Karl Popper's um,
mm,
breakdown of science. And so science coming from the Latin word to know, scio, sciere. And so essentially, if we equate intelligence with this original root word of science, being to know, that according to Popper, you know, there were two kinds of knowledge. That there was a kind of theoretical knowledge, which, in other words, it's a theoretical knowledge is the explanation you have in your head about what the world, about what reality is, and so that includes things like religion, but it also includes things like, you know, quantum theory or the theory of relativity, and these are basically framework theories about, you know, what reality consists of. Now, according to Popper, these theories are never right, you know, absolutely true, but they sort of approximate to something and they pass various tests, so they have a certain validity. Then there's another kind of knowledge, which Popper said, which is a kind of basically a kind of instrumental knowledge, or a sort of inductive knowledge. Well, a knowledge of instrumentalism and a knowledge that's based around induction. So basically, you know facts. You know facts, like you know the way to the store, you know how to cook spaghetti, and you know how to drive a car. So you have skills, in other words. And so computers are great at this second type of knowledge, but computers cannot theorize, they can't conjecture. There's no danger I can see of any kind of AI ever coming up with a new theory of reality. So, for example, if you programmed an AI with everything that everything, all of Isaac Newton's knowledge about physics
mhm.
and gravity and so on, this AI would never come up with Einstein's theory of relativity, just because it doesn't have the basic data to do it. And so that's the difference. AI, human beings theorize and produce value systems, and AI is purely instrumental. It's basically a tool, a super intelligent tool, but it's a tool. And so we have to be careful when we then start invoking AI, when we think about things like ethics, or, people have written a bunch of papers. A lot of people have written papers about things like, can we get AI to address questions of bias in society? The answer is yes, we can, in the sense that it can identify anomalies. But then people are talking about, can we program the AI to be fair? And my view of this is absolutely not, because what is fair is going to be somewhat subjective, and it's going to be somewhat contingent on situations. So if you start empowering AI to make decisions based on your idea of what's fair, in effect, you're in danger of actually accelerating the thing you're trying to avoid. You're sort of accelerating the singularity because you're handing AI the power of making decisions over people's welfare. That is just too, it's just not ready for that, and it's probably never will be ready for that.
Well, that's something that I explored in another episode with Robbie Stamp, and you may know him or not,
Yeah,
but
I've come across them. Yeah,
yeah, and we talked about this idea of the data that we need to be handing over that should be like obligatory to hand over. For example, if I'm in the hospital and I am getting treated, and later on we look at it now as it being in the hospital, but later on maybe wearing a Fitbit for our whole lives since we're a child, and or a Neuralink, right? And it has all of the data on us, all of our health data. Should we be obliged to hand that data over or not? And what Robbie made the point of, which I thought was very clever, was he said, imagine if you're driving on the highway and you're driving like a total dick, and it's really just, it's pouring rain. The conditions are absolutely horrible for driving out, a little bit more crazy than normal, and you're just doing it because you're having a joyride, right? And some system comes over the intercom and says, hey, Robbie, if this is your first warning, you need to drive more in control.
sure.
And Robbie doesn't listen. And he gets another warning like, Robbie, this is it. This is your last warning. If you stop driving, you're good. But if you don't stop, or if you stop driving like a complete ass, then you're good. But if you don't, then we're going to take measures against you. And then, he doesn't because he's just pissed at the world or whatever. And then it comes over the intercom and it says, look, your insurance has been revoked. Anything that happens is now on you, right? And so that idea of it just made the decision for you. So you speak about that, and I find it fascinating, your opinion on that, and I'd love to hear what you have to
Well,
say.
within reason, I think there are kind of closed systems where AI could and probably will work and do interesting things. So, for example, if you're driving a car dangerously, now insurance companies I think already offer um, tachometers, I think they're called, and they put them in
Mm,
cars, and you can get cheaper insurance if you have this in your car because it's a device that basically, certainly it records, it might even transmit your driving, how you're driving the car.
yeah.
Certainly it records it, and it can presumably with good AI, it can quickly build a profile of how you're driving the car because it'll use location and it'll use speed and all the rest of it, and what method. Now I think it's valid for an insurance company to say to you, if you agree to put this in, we will give you a cheaper insurance rate, and it kind of incentivizes you to drive more carefully. I mean, it's a funny way of how we approach risk. If you compare, for example, the response to COVID-19, the number of people who die from COVID-19 is I believe a lot smaller than those who die from car accidents. So governments and states in the US have implemented around the world, and states in the US have implemented very draconian anti-COVID policies to protect people. So I can see an argument that if you're in a car, that an AI, I mean, the AI mightn't even be connected to anything. You can imagine a scenario where you're driving a car and you're driving it very dangerously and the car just shuts down. I mean, I remember having this conversation with somebody about, and it has been thought of by somebody else. But this idea occurred to me, and I don't think it's original, but it occurred to me a couple of years ago about aircraft. That there should be something in an aircraft that if an AI detects some irregular behavior in the aircraft, like the Malaysian airline aircraft that went off the radar and disappeared and it was
Uh-huh.
never found a couple of years ago. That there could be something, you could easily design something in the aircraft, even with current technology, that when it detects something irregular, it just kicks in. It just kicks in and finds the nearest airport and lands the plane, regardless. Regardless. And I think I think for motor cars, for cars, you can imagine something similar in the sense that if you're driving the car very dangerously, the thing just shuts down and parks. you know And that would be, now, of course, you can imagine how it might go wrong. You can imagine scenarios where it was erroneously it sort of activated and that caused problems. So sure, but AI doing that kind of stuff, I'm not hugely against. I guess what you're alluding to though is data being transmitted in real time to some authority like the police,
Yeah, exactly.
and then and if there's no due process, there needs to be due process. But yeah, I mean, and that's a problem we have at the moment with the world, because we live in this kind of administered world. So I was out driving a couple of years ago somewhere near Bristol in England, and it was early morning, and I just made a mistake. I mean, I got confused on the motorway, and I took an exit from the motorway that in fact was an exit which I thought was the exit I needed to get to Bath, the city of Bath, I think it was. And I took this exit, but it wasn't. It was just the wrong exit. I just misread the sign, and the exit was a kind of a service road that was used by vehicles maintaining the road. And I then managed to go back down the other side and get back onto the road again, so I was fine. But I was spotted by a camera, and there was like, here's a fine. Pay the fine, and the fine is like, you pay £30 fine, and if you don't pay in 25 days, it's £60. So what are you going to do? You just pay the fine, right? You haven't got the time to actually have an argument about this, because you're going to spend about £500 worth of your time arguing about it, and you have to pay it anyway. So it kind of automated decisions which are fining you, or which are and the problem with AI, of course, is that states will be tempted to expand these in quite draconian fashion.
Yeah.
Because governments like having power, and that's definitely a danger. But the problem there is not the technology. The problem, is the use of the technology. I mean, a key argument in my paper is that an algorithm that's unfair, let's say, okay, let me start this again. The biggest risk of unfair treatment of people by systems using AI, in my view, does not come from AI that is badly designed. AI that is badly designed, as in, it's not doing what it was intended to do, or they've used bad data, or whatever. So that doesn't represent to me the most part of the risk, because that's actually a relatively trivial problem, easily identifiable after the fact. Assuming you live in a fair society with laws of equality, you can easily rectify that and compensation will be paid. The real problem is you have a perfectly functioning AI that's working perfectly as intended, and the government gets this AI and it then uses it to target people. So let me give you an example. I mean, there's an AI system in use in the United States called COMPAS.
I was just going to ask you about that, because
Yeah.
I was going to say, the idea of Minority Report and this whole putting someone's life on the line, that's probably
Sure.
the highest stakes that you can play with, right?
Yeah. Now the thing about COMPAS basically is a predictive system, a system that aims to predict the likelihood of reoffending. And by all accounts, it's reasonably reliable, as in it works, right? As in, you take all these people and you put in all these parameters in, and it's a kind of a risk of reoffending. Now, what it does is it reflects the fact that African Americans are more highly represented amongst groups who reoffend in the data. So it reflects that fact. And it's using parameters like, are you in a gang? Are any of your friends in a gang? Your previous record, all this kind of stuff. So African Americans are more highly represented. The system works as intended. What the system does is the system is used by sentencing decisions by judges I think in a number of states in the US. And so based on your risk of reoffending, they'll send you to jail for longer. And as you know, the United States criminal justice system operates on quite a precautionary principle. And the precautionary principle is that the protection of the public against a violent, potentially violent offender is kind of, it takes priority. And so violent offenders kind of get locked away for a relatively long time. Now, whether you think that's a proper use of the system or not is going to depend on your philosophy about criminal justice and law enforcement and so on and so forth. But the exact same system could be used to identify likely reoffenders and, to then justify lots of social intervention, social spending, all this kind of stuff. which would be, let's say from a more liberal point of view, it would be about rehabilitation and reform and social reform to prevent reoffending in certain communities. So the same AI could do that too, so the problem isn't the AI. If you have a problem with the incarceration rate of Black Americans being at such a high rate in the United States, there's no point in blaming the AI. It's the policy that you have to talk about, and what you think about the policy is going to depend on where you stand on the question of criminal justice and so on and so forth. So my worry is that people are kind of looking at the AI saying, oh, the AI is the problem. Now, all that said, sometimes a policymaker will invoke an AI and they will say, oh yeah, but the AI said it, so it must be true. And that, so clearly, if anybody's justifying criminal sentencing policy in the US on the basis that the AI says it is a good idea, that's not true. That is just not a valid argument. The AI is not giving you the reason. It's just a tool.
Well, it brings up this idea around when you're looking at these AI systems and you can choose for good or you can choose for how we're doing it now. The big question is, like you're mentioning, like, which one are we choosing for and who is the person that is choosing that, right?
Sure.
And I think that's a very valid point that you're bringing up, that the AI itself is not inherently bad, but the way that we're using it may not be the best way. And so one thing that comes to my mind, though, as we are talking about this, is the ideas of DNA testing and how that was all the rage with like proving if someone was guilty or not. And later on, just, more recently, right, in the 80s or whenever DNA testing came out, and it was just like, okay, this person did it. We have his DNA or her DNA, whatever. And then later on, they find, well, yeah, it's not as reliable as we thought it was.
Sure.
Right. And so, but some people potentially have, if we're talking in the US, they've been killed already. And then they find out, yeah, that DNA test, let's not talk about it.
It's a belief in science. There is, and at the moment, I think this is a problem as well. This is my own personal view about the general view of science, that there is a belief, governments will say with respect to the whole policy in response to COVID-19, they say, we are following the science. Now, there is no such thing as the science. There are studies that are done by people who think about these things for a living, and then there's the question of governments need to balance the various risks, between the social impact of lockdown on one hand, the actual danger of the disease on the other hand, and then the sort of mental health side and the economic side and so on. So someone kind of says, oh, well, the scientist says we must do this, but the scientist, you will find reputable scientists who have different opinions on the same subject. And when people point to science and they say this is truth, that is not what science is. Science is never ever truth. Science is just conjectures which are subject to studies and tests, and so therefore it might be strong or valid. But remember, I mean, the program of the Third Reich, which essentially was a program of a sort of racial project for the racial quote unquote purification of the world. This was based on the science too, and the science at the time was eugenics and so forth, and it was completely bogus. It was basically unfounded, and yet it was thought to be scientific, and that's the and we should never think that because we have a state of the art of the science that somehow we are living in wiser times. We're not necessarily living in wiser times, but there are unintended consequences. That's are the biggest thing we should consider. It's how little we actually really know. It's what we should always have in front of our mind. It's only when we think we know. It's only when we think we really, really understand something that we're in danger.
Yeah.
Because invariably we don't, as well as we think.
Yeah. Well, this begs the question of who is to blame when you get rogue AI and you've put all of this, uh, it's not pressure, but basically you've put, it's very high stakes AI, we could say. And who is there to blame? Is it the person that designed the system? Is it the person that implemented the system? Is it the policymaker for allowing that to be the go-to?
I think there are two sides to this. One is what I call the sort of ex ante idea of regulating AI, which is you sort of make sure it works before you implement it. And then there's the ex post regulation of AI, which is let it get implemented and then clean up afterwards, any mistakes that are there. Now, clearly, in terms of regulation before you implement ex ante for AI, if you're going to have an AI that flies an airplane, then it's got to be working pretty perfectly before you allow it to be installed. So if you imagine the way, I think it's the FAA in the United States regulate aviation technology properly, or in the case of Boeing 737 MAX, don't regulate it properly.
Yeah.
But the idea there is that the system has to be safe before it gets implemented. And that's perfectly reasonable. So when it comes to human safety, like if the AI is being used to drive a train or drive a bus, or if it's been used in terms of medicine, like a robot that's working on an operation for a patient or something, it's got to be right before it gets implemented. You need rules around that. If somebody makes a mistake in an algorithm or in designing the AI, or the data is bad or whatever, then clearly there's going to have to be a chain of responsibility, and liability will get worked out just the way it gets worked out now. If you buy a car with a faulty component that causes you to crash the car, there's going to be a chain of liability, and it's going to go back to the manufacturer. You might sue the manufacturer. The manufacturer might sue the component supplier. Which is perfectly fine. So there is a kind of a chain of liability, and there are existing regulations around safety, whereby people can be sanctioned for not following good procedure. When it comes to AI and human rights, and this is where my paper differs, I think, from some of the contemporary thinking amongst other people at the moment, I don't think you can regulate ex ante for human rights, and this is because knowing when something is fair or not cannot be known in a scientific way, because most of the unfairness is going to come, as I say, from the way it's implemented. Now, of course, AI might make mistake. You might make a mistake with an AI. So let's say, for example, you're a lending institution and you create an AI, and the AI is going to generate, let's say, is going to read people's curriculum vitae, CVs, resumes, and it's going to then send out letters for interview. Okay, so let's say it's looking for it's assessing candidates for a job, and it writes to 1,000 people, or 50 people, calling them for interview for this job or for several jobs. And let's say, for the sake of argument, every single one of these candidates is a white American male, let's say, and we're in the US here, and none of them is black, none of them is Asian, whatever it is. And they're all white American males. Now, as you would look at the data coming back, you'd kind of be looking at it, saying, why is this? Why is it doing this? Why is it doing this? And it may well be, let's say, for the sake of argument, that there's just a mistake in the algorithm. And maybe the mistake. I think Google had this problem, where the error was the AI was correlating certain activities with people who they wanted to hire. So I think they had an issue of bias over men over women. I mean, Google fixed it. As soon as they saw it, they fixed it. So the AI had an error, and they weren't selecting sufficient female candidates for, I think, some posts. And the error was that there was a correlation taking place within the decision-making system that was essentially correlating male candidates with certain things that generally male people do, and women don't do, or do less of. It's might have been sports or something like this, or maybe in certain colleges, you went to certain colleges or whatever. So that's a kind of a problem which I think you need to fix, but it's hard to fix in advance, because if you insist it gets fixed in advance, you'd be micromanaging every single step of every single engineer, and I don't think I think because there are systems, we have equality legislation, and because we have systems of redress, I think it's more practical to fix that kind of thing after the fact. Another thing about AI, again, and people talk about equality and so on in AI, and the one thing, there is a kind of, at the moment, there's a concern that, you should have a diverse team who's writing the AI, so that they should be, gender diverse, they should be racially diverse, and so on. And then you have this other thing about, so people like that are going to work on the algorithm and the AI and all that, and that's kind of really cool. And then you get the AI. But I mean, I remember pointing out to somebody, and again, this wasn't original. Most companies' hiring practices are done according to a kind of unwritten heuristic, which is we hire people like us, right? Okay, and what I want to throw into the mix here is if you have a bunch of people who've all been to Stanford or have all been to Harvard or Yale, okay, sure, you've got black candidates and white people and Jewish people and Asian people and whatever it is, but like they've all been to Yale. So maybe the issue around equality and social mobility and sort of AI cuts across more than ethnic and gender diversity. That there are class issues as well, and there are class issues, and no one talks about those. How does an AI deal with that? How does an AI solve that problem? I don't think it can that easily. I think that, and my worry, I guess, is that if people decide their hiring practices are going to be encoded into AIs, they will actually lock out stuff they're not seeing, including people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who may have not gone to the right school, but who may in fact be very bright and very smart, and who may just require a minimal bit of help coming into the company to really get up to speed. And that, I think, is a significant issue, because I think the biggest issue at the moment in the Western world is lack of social mobility. And that's really very important. So the AI is it's a tool, and inequality can be fixed after the fact. But the scenario I'm outlining to you about the use of an AI, to make sure it's gender and racially diverse, the question is it socioeconomically diverse? And it, a lot of the time it isn't. So there you have an example of a bunch of people saying, we now understand the issues of equality and diversity and so on. We're going to solve this problem once and for all by putting it into an AI. But they're missing something huge, which is socioeconomics. And that's a kind of my suspicion about AI. So regulating for safety, yes, absolutely. Before you get into that plane, if the AI is going to be fixed, regulation for safety. But everything else, it's much more subjective. It's much more political. It's much more nebulous. It's much more difficult. Obvious discrimination you can point out and kill, but it's hard to fix everything, because we don't even agree on what discrimination is.
Well, yeah, and do you feel that there is always going to be like a blind spot in these bias questions? And like you're saying, we fix for this, and this, but then we forget about this part.
Yeah, my paper took aim particularly at what I call a kind of a maximalist view of AI. And the maximalist view of AI was that, I had two versions of AI. One was a kind of minimalist view of regulating AI, which I would hold to, which is that you should do your best to make sure the thing, your AI is not biased. And obviously it has to be safe, but make sure it's not biased before you use it, and have good procedures for looking at what data you're using, et cetera, and how the algorithms are designed and so on. And then fix problems in terms of fairness after the event, and have methods of redress and so on and so forth after the event. But then there's a maximalist view of AI. And the maximalist view of AI says, actually, we can program AIs to be fair. We can program to actually be fair, to make decisions that are fair. This I do not agree with. This, I think, is we're in the realm of Frankenstein here. Because once you program the AI to be fair, you are essentially outsourcing moral decisions to the AI, and you are going to end up pointing at the AI saying, well, the AI is fair, and my worry about that is, and this cuts to the heart of the current moment in politics, I guess, and this is why my paper probably is a little controversial, because my worry about that is that the AI itself was going to become this battleground in the culture war. It's going to become this battleground in this very divided politics we have at the moment, in especially in the US, to a large extent in the UK, slightly lesser extent in Europe, in continental Europe, and that is that you're going to have one side of people who want to instrumentalize AI to further their idea of what a fair society looks like, and that I think is potentially a huge problem, because it isn't really quite clear that even the most liberal and conscientious person is ever going to be that fair, or as fair as he or she thinks she is, because it's just too hard to catch. It's too hard to, I mean, what you need is a healthy skepticism about whether any of us can be truly fair, and then you need corrective measures in this. My current concern at the moment is about socioeconomic fairness, as well as other kinds of fairness. You need to hire people and value people in terms of, well, in terms of their jobs or for roles and positions in society. You want the best people who can do the job, but you need to be very conscious of people not being excluded. Clearly, not being excluded on grounds of gender or on grounds of ethnicity, but also not excluded because they just went to the wrong school. And I can't see how an AI program for fairness can do it, because what it's going to be doing is it's going to be making automatic decisions. You're applying to get into Yale, and you get rejected because the AI rejected you, and the AI rejected you because the AI has a quota, of people of your gender, which it's letting in order for the overall profile to be fair. Well, that means that you were kicked off the list of potential candidates based on what a machine felt in order to match a standard. And I don't think anybody would feel happy about that, because you would kind of think, that's just a machine, making a decision.
And in other context, it's like you're saying, okay, well, if we give the AI the final say,
yeah,
and it is what deems things to be fair or not, there's so many different parts of, culture. One culture, things are fair, and another culture, they're very different. And even inside the US, I can think about on the East Coast or the West Coast, there's many different views that people have about what is fair and what is okay to do
sure,
in business or
sure,
in society, and what is not. And so, depending on all of that, when an algorithm that has been coded by, let's say that they've been coded by a diverse group, how can you take into account all of these minor details that coming from, just think about someone, imagine someone coming from the Middle East with some kind of cultural views,
sure.
and an algorithm that was created by someone that is from the East Coast,
That's right.
and you don't get the disconnect is so large in my mind. So I can see your point on that. What I wanted to ask about, though, is how about when it comes to malicious activity? Is that just is it the fault of the person who's programming or the person who is implementing?
Well, I think the liability, I think in a way, the way we deal with malicious activity and in AI, it's going to be the same as any other kind of malicious activity. So, so let's say, you and I are working in a company, and we're in the kind of HR department. Now, we could maliciously enter the names of all the candidates for the jobs we're hiring for. Forget about an AI. We could just put it into Google Sheets or Excel, and we could have columns that say, white male on top, and we could just click everybody, put an X after everybody who's white male, and just do a kind of a sort and find all the white males. Let's write all these guys. So that would be just as malicious as if we were using a $300,000 AI program to do essentially the same thing. And so the liability would fall on us as executives, and it would fall on the company for lack of oversight. And if they were going to get fined for discriminatory behavior, then that would be the responsibility of the directors. Now, if we used an AI and there was an AI programmer who had done this, then I'm not sure what kind of liability would arise if it was a question of equality issues. My instinct is, such a person would never work again, in that business, and that ought to be enough.
Well, don't you feel it's a lot easier to make an excuse if I'm doing it maliciously and then it comes back and I get found out and I say, well, that was just the data. Like it was a bug in my
Yeah,
programming.
I mean, and the thing is, there are cases where you mightn't know, you mightn't be sure. So this is why this is why we need systems which are robust beforehand in terms of. So, for example, if you're a company, if you're a bank, and you're hiring, and you're buying an AI system to help your hiring practices, and you buy it from a very large company that is an AI producer, like a global company that's a technology AI producer. Um, the system might be mistaken, or okay, maybe the department that sold you the AI within this company was rogue, and they were run by some lunatic who basically who said, oh, you can never hire anybody who's a Muslim or whatever. Then the same liability is going to apply. So you will be able to sue this company. You will be able to get compensation. The person inside will get fired if the company at the most senior level was found to be engaging in this practice. You've got like shareholder blowback. You've got trade sanctions. There are all sorts of existing sanctions that will be applied. But liability in AI, it's going to be it's going to have a particular profile, of course, because you've got the areas where it can go wrong, like it can go wrong in the data or it can go wrong in the algorithm. But these are all not categorically different concepts than the guy who makes your farm machinery, the company who makes your farm machinery. And if a component in the farm machinery, something goes wrong with it and it hurts somebody. I mean, essentially the same principles apply. It's just
Yeah, to your point.
you have standards of manufacture and development and review and redress and you find people necessary and so on.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about what is happening with the EU. And in your paper, you outline the EU's regulations. And I thought it was interesting how you talked about the proposal that the EU is saying that human rights equals safety.
Yeah. So
And
yeah,
let's dive into that a little bit more.
this is my problem with the EU. What the EU was doing in the white paper was it wanted to regulate essentially for human rights as if human rights were safety, which meant it wanted to implement ex ante, before implementation rules, before you were allowed to use AIs that might affect people's rights. And I thought this was overkill, because I think that you just can't do it. It's just not possible to do it because, as I say, the AI might work perfectly well, might be perfectly fair, but you take it and you use it in a different context. So, I might have an AI, for example, I might have an AI I mean, the COMPAS thing is a good example, but, I might have an AI that, let's say, identifies people who could develop, let's say, long-term injury at work if they have a certain profile. I'm doing a certain kind of job. Well, you might develop that AI in order to implement measures to prevent long-term injury at work. So we're going to identify people, we're going to have special measures to, for their posture, or special measures, to kind of monitor them from a health point of view so they don't suffer from these injuries. On the other hand, another company might buy this and it might run candidates through the profile, and just say, we're not going to hire these people in the first place because they have long-term injury potential and it's going to cost us money. So they can redline, they can use it to redline. Once you have an AI that can identify people who could be vulnerable, you have an AI that could redline people and keep them out of work and keep them out of jobs. So that's something we have to be aware of. Insurance companies, you have the same issue where, insurance companies, if they're using AI to really finely tune risk and knowledge about risk, on one level, this is very important information, because it means that we, as a society, we can more effectively make provision for problems that are caused because we know really where the risk is now rather than it being a mystery. On the other hand, the principle of insurance is based on pooling of risk. And so this gives you the opportunity to redline and say, well, all these people, they have all these kind of risks, so we're not going to insure them because they're not profitable. And that it creates that kind of a problem.
So is your opinion then of it's not the AI we need to regulate, it's the use of the AI that we need to regulate, or do you feel that there's
Yeah, and I
nothing
think
that needs
I
to
mean,
be
in
regulated?
fairness to the EU, I mean, the EU completely gets that. But I think the problem with the EU proposals was that they seem to be focusing on the technology itself as the source of the danger. And really what they have to say, I mean, it's a comment I once made some years ago to a financial regulator in Ireland. And I was talking about banking regulation or insurance regulation. And I said, they had all these very detailed micromanaging rules about how insurance companies deal with customers and all this kind of stuff, right? And I kind of said, you could just say to the insurance companies, like, here are the things that we think are unfair in terms of outcome. And if this happens to a customer of yours, and we are certain it's happened and you did it, then we're going to fine you such an enormous amount of money that you will never do it again. However, in terms of how you avoid doing this, we don't care. It's your problem, right? It's your problem. You figure it out, right? So in a way, that I think might be the approach with AI. You just sort of say, well, look, we know what an unfair outcome looks like. We know what an unfair outcome looks like. It looks like the following, and these findings can be made based on equality legislation that's already in place, or GDPR data protection legislation that's already in place. So if you breach that, we're gonna fine you and make you pay compensation. So figure out how to avoid that. Now, I don't apply that to safety. In the case of safety, you need an FAA type arrangement. You can't leave that to because safety is very easy to define. When something, a mistake that goes wrong in an AI that causes injury, any reasonable person will say, well, the AI stopped functioning and therefore it's thing, right? But in essence, what we're talking about in terms of AI and equality is that the AI might be working perfectly well, but the way it's being used, might be wrong. So all they have to simply say to, I think, AI producers and users is, look, we know what unfair treatment looks like. And we have laws about that. How you commit the crime is of limited interest to us. I mean, I'm being slightly facetious here, but how you commit the crime is being of limited interest to us. Just we know when you committed it, and so will you, and therefore we will sanction you from doing it. And I'm not saying they should take that view completely, but I think they should. If they think they can micro-regulate AI for fairness, I think that's an illusion. It's a big mistake. I suspect they know it's a mistake because I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's a valid point, and I understand where you're coming from completely. I think it is very important to look at that side of things and not always blame it on the technology. It's a little unfair to say that it's the technology that's doing it when everything, it was written by the humans, it was implemented by the humans, and now
it's actually more than unfair, though. It's actually dangerous because you're right. It's unfair in the sense that it sidesteps the issue. Okay, the issue might be in your institution, but it's also dangerous because it encourages a kind of corollary view, which is that if the AI can do all this harm, well, maybe it can do lots of good too. And so it encourages this other kind of positivist view that we can use the AI to make society a fairer place. And that, I think, is I point out to that being a very, very dangerous idea.
Very valid. Yeah, that is a great insight. Now, I have one last question for you, and we'll wrap it up. I want to know: are you a robot?
No, there's actually a piece in my paper about the Searle versus Dennett debate and the Chinese room debate, John Searle and Dennett, and I slightly think that Searle makes a bad argument. I agree with Searle, but he doesn't present his case, I think, as well as he might. And I disagree with Dennett. And if I can recall the basic argument, no, I don't think we're robots, not because I believe in some kind of Cartesian ineffable soul. I think we're not robots because we have the capacity to hypothesize and to invent frameworks that explain reality, that are kind of, that are creative and have to do with our creative faculties, as much as our scientific reasoning faculties. And robots don't do that. Robots are instruments, and we are more than instruments. We are instruments, but we are also people who make myths and make frameworks of explanation.
Yeah, robots don't do that. And in your opinion, robots will never do that.
I don't see it, not under current design conceptions. No, because what we've seen so far about robots is that they are an AI will always use it's using data it already has. It's using the framework it already has, and it might produce a fantastic move like AlphaGo that wins a game, and we don't know how it did it, but it might be a good move, you know. But I don't see on the current configuration that AI will ever do that.
Brilliant.
Hypothesize.
Paul, this has been amazing. I
Okay.
really enjoy hearing your views and hearing how you are attacking this problem. And I feel like this is, I told you at the beginning, but we weren't recording yet. It has been a dream of mine to meet someone that works at a think tank. And finally, now I can die happy. It is incredible to get to speak with you. And it's obvious that you're putting a lot of thought and attention onto these current problems. They're top of mind for a lot of us. So,
well, it's
I
been a
thank
great pleasure, and thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure.
Well, excellent. I think that will wrap up this version of Are You a Robot podcast. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We will see you next time.
Fantastic. All right.